Part 1.
You will hear a woman phoning about her membership of a carpool, a type of car-sharing organisation. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 4. Listen carefully to the first part of the conversation and answer questions 1 to 4.
Hello, your carpool. How can I help?
Oh, hello. Look, I used one of the cars earlier, and I want to complain. I'm not one to make a fuss usually, but this isn't the first time there's been a problem. I'm getting fed up with it.
I'm sorry to hear that. Can I take your membership number first?
Yes, it's 520016.
520016. Is that Julie speaking?
Yes, Julie Gold.
Hi, Julie. Now, let me just check your booking. Your complaint's about the most recent booking, is it?
Well, yes, this complaint is, but like I say, it's not the first.
OK, so that was the Fiat, registration number YPT723S, in City Street this morning at 10:30?
Yes, that's it. But no, I think it was the car in Baker Road.
My records say City Street. That's the grey Fiat.
Oh, yes, Baker Road was yesterday.
And that booking was fine?
Well, yes, that one was.
Good. So what exactly was the problem today, then?
Now you have some time to look at questions 5 to 10. Now listen to the rest of the conversation and answer questions 5 to 10.
OK, I went to pick the car up and it wasn't in the parking bay. I was in quite a hurry and I have to say it was very stressful. Of course, I thought somebody else still had the car out. Anyway, I was about to phone when I saw the car on the other side of the street about 100 metres down. Can't you make it clear to users that they have to park the cars back in the bays?
Well, yes, we do. If I had to guess, I'd say that the previous user left it there because the bay was occupied. We'll phone to check and find out, but that's the most likely explanation.
But people aren't supposed to be occupying the parking bays, are they?
Well, no, but they do. They usually think it's okay to park for a few minutes.
Well, in that case, shouldn't members wait until somebody comes back to get their vehicle? I mean, in that situation, I always hoot, and keep on hooting, to alert the car owner to the fact I'm there, and that I expect them to move. It usually takes only a few minutes. I wish people would show a little more patience.
As I say, I'll phone and...
There are other things I want to discuss. When I did eventually get to the car, I was shocked at how filthy it was, both inside and out. The wheels and the bottom of the vehicle were covered in mud. Inside, the carpets were muddy too, and the back seat covered in dog hair. It's pretty obvious that the last user had driven out to the country to take his dogs out walking. Can't there be some rules about what people can and can't use the cars for?
I hear what you're saying, Julie. I think this is a fair point, and I'm very sorry. I certainly will call the previous user to take this up.
And make sure that the cars are given a decent valeting every so often. Right, one more thing. Once I dusted off the seat and found the keys, I expected them to be left under a seat or in the door compartment, I finally started up the engine. I was dismayed to see how low the fuel gauge was. This has been the case before, and it's really annoying. I thought the membership regulations state quite clearly that it's the driver's responsibility to fill up when the gauge goes below the quarter full mark. Am I right?
Yes, that is what we say.
So how come I had to sort that out before I could get on with my journey?
Look, I think all things considered, we'll compensate you for your experience today. How does that sound, Julie?
Are you going to scrap the payment for today's booking?
Well, I could do that, but now the booking's on the system, it's complicated. I'd rather offer you complimentary hours. Today's booking was for 4 hours, so we'll say you have 4 hours of uncharged usage taken off your next bill.
But what if my next booking is for less than 4 hours?
Don't worry, the booking will not be charged and the remaining amount will automatically go forward to the booking after that. All you have to do is key free hours into the comments option when you make the booking online.
OK, I guess I should say thank you, but I'm still very cross.
That is the end of Part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to Part 2. Part 2.
You will hear a man talking about areas for growing vegetables in towns called allotments.
First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 17. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 17.
Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to see so many of you. I was going to start by saying that more and more people are seeing the value of growing their own fruit and vegetables, but now I don't need to. First of all, let me say that whether you have a garden or not, there are all sorts of benefits to having a plot of land you can call your own, and it will give you a great sense of satisfaction. OK, let's assume you have a garden. Chances are it's small. Most gardens in cities are hardly big enough for a few pots of herbs and a couple of rows of beans. Now that's where allotments come in. A typical plot is around 250 square metres, big enough to feed the family for a year. Big enough, too, to grow a whole range of vegetables, fruit as well perhaps, not just cabbages and potatoes. Moving on to the social aspects of an allotment. How many people can say their garden is a meeting place? You might chat with your next-door neighbour every now and again, but allotments are notorious communal hives. There are usually between 10 and 30 plots on any allotment site, and they bring together people from all sorts of social backgrounds. Where else do you find a lawyer deep in conversation with a lorry driver? There's often a great sense of camaraderie, with initiatives to involve the wider community, including the less able, the retired, and the unemployed. In urban areas nowadays, people may have a tiny yard or a balcony, but it's not a garden. An allotment is a huge recreational asset for anyone in that situation. First of all, there's the exercise. Renting an allotment costs around £30 a month. That's generally a lot cheaper than joining a gym. Then there's the involvement with nature. Watching seeds grow into mature plants gives so much pleasure and such a sense of achievement. Spending time outside in the fresh air boosts our mental as well as physical well-being. And one more thing. Don't forget allotments are also an enormous benefit to the environment. They provide invaluable green space in our ever more clogged-up towns and cities, making them more sustainable and appealing to live in. These spaces provide a habitat for wild plants, birds, insects, and occasionally bigger animals. What's more, locally grown food doesn't have to be transported long distances, and that helps to reduce road traffic and hence pollution. Now, food, a subject we all like talking about, because the main appeal of an allotment is obviously taking home all the freshly picked vegetables and fruit. So why is Grow Your Own so good? Well, to start with, there's the superior flavour. Food you've grown yourself tastes infinitely better than anything bought in a supermarket because it will be super fresh. Another point in its favour is the range. These days, gardeners are growing an amazing variety of vegetables on their allotments. Finally, there's the bonus of knowing that the produce you've grown is organic. You know that what you're eating wasn't grown on an industrial-scale farm or sprayed with large amounts of pesticides.
Now you have some time to look at questions 18 to 20. Now listen to the next part of the talk and answer questions 18 to 20.
Now I'm going to show you a typical allotment from the site closest to here on Finley Road. Let me just get this image up. That's it. Can everyone see? So, as you can see here, each plot has a fence around it and its own gate. Between the beds are grass walkways. That means you can walk in and around comfortably and not get your boots too muddy. There are soil beds on either side. This plot, in fact, has two smaller flower beds opposite a much larger area for vegetables. And there's also a glass house for growing tomatoes or anything that needs more warmth and protection. Here you can see one of those at the front near the gate. Most allotments have their own shed at the far end, as you can see. Allotments do need a water source, though, and there are stone sinks outside the sheds. A hose pipe can be attached to the tap for easy watering. Some of the plots have a pond, though they're not always popular, as they tend to attract insects. And this plot has a compost bin at the end opposite the shed for recycling organic waste. Right, so, how to go about getting an allotment.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You will hear 3 students talking about how to spend their time before going to university.
First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
What's that you're reading, Matt?
Oh, hi, Tara. It's an article about taking a gap year before going to university.
Is that what you're thinking of doing then?
Well, I hadn't really considered it as an option, but reading this has got me thinking. I'm looking forward to starting at uni, but I wouldn't mind a bit of time to myself first.
Hi, guys. What are you talking about?
Hi, Sandy.
How's it going?
Matt's reading about gap years. He wants to put off going to uni.
I think a gap year's a great idea. I'm definitely thinking about it.
Are you? What would you do with the year?
Well, the programmes I've looked at involve volunteering of some kind. I wouldn't want to just go travelling for a year. I can afford that anyway. The idea would be to work and help people, but more importantly, to grow up and come back knowing more about the world than I do now. Obviously, I'd choose somewhere hot and sunny.
So, what exactly is volunteering? I mean, OK, I understand it means doing something for nothing, but what does it mean in terms of a gap year?
Yeah, it means working with programmes in countries where people need support or some kind of aid.
I bet your mum and dad aren't quite as enthusiastic as you are about all this.
On the contrary, they're really supportive. They can see all the pluses. They realise that I don't know exactly where I want to be in 10 years' time. They think it'll give me time to figure things out and not make decisions I might regret later.
I think I'd be worried about how the university look at it, though. Don't you think it suggests you're just putting off studying?
Definitely not. Our tutor told us that a lot of universities encourage students to take a gap year. They see a year away growing up and maturing as an asset. Students arrive in higher education with an extra year of life experience. Depending on what you do with the time, obviously.
Yes, I can see that tutors might like having a few well-travelled students around. I mean, ones that have a more developed perspective.
I think they also appreciate that students who come back from a year away, doing something worthwhile, have a stronger sense of direction and a clearer idea of what they hope to achieve. They probably speak at least a few words of another language too. The most important thing for the unis is that students are motivated.
So anyway, what does your article say about the options? Do they suggest where students should go on their gap year? You now have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen to the rest of the discussion and answer questions 26 to 30.
Well, apparently, Australia's the country where the highest percentage of students take a gap year, and it's the most popular destination for gap year students from other countries as well as Britain.
I like the sound of a year in Australia.
They say here that there are three main attractions. The abundance of great coast, beautiful beaches, learn to surf, all that stuff. Then there's the amount of time you can spend enjoying outdoor activities, like hiking and loads of sports. And thirdly, the cosmopolitan cities, especially Sydney, which apparently is awesome. It's a great country for young people because there's so much to do, loads of adventure, and sunshine, obviously.
Sounds good to me.
Unfortunately, it says here the cost of getting there in the first place can be prohibitive. However you make your way there, it's expensive, unless the bank of mum and dad help out, that is. Then, look, they also mention various places in Africa, but they single out Ghana. Students can get involved with the construction of new schools or teaching the kids that are already in them.
That does sound really rewarding and interesting, I have to say. I guess there's a huge sense of achievement with something like that, and you get fantastic life experience from living in another culture.
I think you pick up some real practical skills too. Skills you can bring back with you.
Another place I really like the sound of is Nepal.
What's the attraction there?
Most of the volunteering involves teaching again, and it's that sense of achievement that people are after. They also say, let me read it, students are attracted by the simplicity of daily existence. I think they mean you have to spend a year without your computer and all the rest of it. It's all about going back to basics.
So where do people stay?
They live on farms or in mountain retreats.
I'm not so sure I could manage that. I don't mind hard work, but I like a hot shower at the end of the day.
Yeah, I imagine the food's not great either.
They do actually say here that one of the things volunteers miss is good food choices. Anyway, there are plenty of other options. Why don't you read the rest of the...
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4.
You will hear part of a lecture about the film director Alfred Hitchcock. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Listen carefully to the lecture and answer questions 31 to 40.
We've been talking about prominent film directors, and today I want to talk about one of the most influential directors of them all, Sir Alfred Hitchcock. I doubt there's anyone here who hasn't seen at least one of his movies. Let me give you some film titles. Put your hand up if you've seen it. Okay, The Birds, Vertigo, Rear Window, The 39 Steps, Marnie, and of course, the most famous of them all, Psycho. Okay, good. I can see you're all familiar with Hitchcock then. Now people assume that Hitchcock was from America, perhaps because he spent so much of his life working in Hollywood, but he was in fact born in London in 1899. He didn't actually emigrate until he was 40 years old. Most film critics would agree that Hitchcock had a huge impact on cinema. And you may be surprised to learn that he started making movies as early as the 1920s, when most films were silent. His first attempt, in 1922, actually ended in disaster. The film was ironically called Number 13, and production stopped at a late stage due to financial problems. But before he left Britain in 1939, he'd already made classics like Blackmail, the first film with sound made in Britain, The Man Who Knew Too Much, and The 39 Steps, and he was considered Britain's top director. So why was Hitchcock so influential? To start with, he pioneered techniques, especially in the genre of the psychological thriller. He was known as the master of suspense. During a career that spanned more than half a century, Hitchcock created a distinctive, perhaps unique style. One of his innovations was to use a camera the way a person watching would. This gave filmgoers the sense that they were voyeurs rather than just viewers. He exploited camera angles and used innovative editing techniques to build suspense and maximize anxiety. His eye for detail was astonishing. Did you know that the famous scene in Psycho in which Marion is murdered in the shower took a whole week to film? Yes, a scene little more than a minute long. There were around 60 camera positions, and the set had to constantly be deconstructed and reconstructed. Today, that kind of almost obsessive perfection simply wouldn't be cost-effective. A week filming one scene would blow the budget. So what were Hitchcock films about, and who were some of his typical characters? It would be wrong to say that Hitchcock made horror movies, suspense movies or psychological thrillers, but not horror. Hitchcock rarely showed acts of violence. The effort went into building up tension, creating a sense of unease. The viewers know that something terrible is going to happen. They don't need to actually see it. Although his stories feature psychopaths, murderers and fugitives on the run, the real strength of his work is the complex examination of his characters. His movies borrow many themes from psychoanalysis, so it's not surprising that his masterpiece is called Psycho. However, a recurring theme in Hitchcock's stories is the twist ending. That's when the story ends in the way viewers least expect it to. I mean, the good guy turns out to be the bad guy, for example. Think of Psycho. It's the element of surprise that makes the end so creepy. Now, Hitchcock's movies feature many other elements of surprise. Daring elements, in fact. Again, I'll refer to Psycho. Marion is the principal character, and it is her that the viewer relates to and empathizes with. Marion has stolen money, and the viewer wants to know if she will get away with her crime or be caught and punished. Suddenly, a third of the way into the story, Marion is murdered, and the entire dynamic changes. The original storyline is put on hold, and a whole new story begins. No longer able to identify with Marion, the viewer begins to empathize with the new principal character, and that, of course, is the murderer, Norman. In this way, Hitchcock manipulates the audience into seeing the story from a whole new perspective. Did you know that Hitchcock played a small part in each of his movies? He always had a cameo role, and this was a very clever move, as it helped him become known. Filmgoers could put a face to the director. Some might even say that before Hitchcock, the director was a far less significant individual in the filmmaking process. Nowadays, however, people go to see a particular director's movie regardless of who's starring in it.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.